In this video, we will set up our environment in order to be able to write Plutus code, which is what we need in order to write smart contracts on Cardano. Now, in order to get what we need, write Plutus, we'll need, of course, the dependencies, since, as we also said in the previous video, writing smart contracts is just writing Haskell. Just we need some library, and to get those library, you just have to go on GitHub and search for Plutus, and the most likely scenario is that you'll have two repositories as first results, both from the input-output HK, where the first is called Plutus, and here is present the source code for compiling our Haskell code to Plutus core, which is actually the code that runs on the Cardano nodes. And so in the Plutus repository, we find all we need in order to write code that runs on chain, but I suggest you to install the Plutus apps, since here, as we can see from the Caval project, which we'll see what is meant to do when we'll talk about setting up a Plutus project in the very next video. But for now, we can see that we have a field that is called source repository package, and the location is the HTTPS, well, the Plutus repository, which if we copy and paste in our entire new tab, we see is the same repository we saw a moment ago. So we know that the Plutus apps repository depends from the Plutus itself, which contains the on-chain part, and on top of the on-chain code, the Plutus apps contains the source code in order to write the off-chain code in Haskell. So by installing the Plutus app repository, you're sure that you have everything you need. And in order to install it, you'll need just to click here, copy the link of this repository, and then you'll have just to run git clone and the repository we just got. I do already have it in another path, so I don't need to reinstall it. But anyways, once you run the git clone, you'll end up in a new folder which contains all the, well, code that is present in this repository that we see here. And with that, we got what is needed in order to start writing Plutus code. However, if we try to have a look at some Plutus code, and in this case, I'm using the code that you'll find in the Plutus Pioneer program. Well, here there is a lot of code, and we should be able to at least read what this code is doing. If you're not, remember to have a look at the Plutus oriented Haskell course on this channel. In any case, well, now the Haskell extension is start recognizing that there is something that is not okay, and we see that we get some errors in the moment that the Haskell extension tries to compile what is present in this Haskell file. And this is because, well, as we also had the occasion to say, Plutus has a lot of dependencies, and by a lot I mean there are quite a lot of dependencies, and getting the correct version for all those dependencies often is not a easy task to do. But fortunately, by installing the Plutus app repository, we got some utilities with that, and in order to use those utilities, we'll first need to install the nix-shell program, and by searching install nix-shell, we should get to the Nix installation guide. And well, we see that all we need to run in order to get Nix installed on our machine is to run this command, and then either to run this source which we installed by running this Nix installation, or either to reboot our machine. In any case, after we perform some steps that we can find here, we will have available in our shell some program that is called nix-shell. And for now, we see that we get some kind of error while trying to run nix-shell as is. So let's try to understand what nix-shell is supposed to do, since as run normally here, we see that we get an error. And usually when we get an error, it may be a good idea to try to ask for some help to that same program. Well, here we get quite a lot of information, and among those information, we see this option here, which may help us to understand what is going on here. And we see that if we launch nix-shell with the packages or the -p option, followed with some packages, we are able to set up an environment in which the specified packages are present. All right, let's try this. Let's try to run nix-shell with p and without any arguments. We see that now it runs and seems to have not done much. However, this is a new shell environment, different than the one we were before, and I can show you this. Let me just exit and we'll be back to our own shell. In fact, if you're not sure about this, you can always try to ask what is the shell we are using. In this case, this shell is in the -bin-bash. If we try to run the same command after running the nix shell with no packages, we see that the program of this shell is a different bash than the one in which we were before. So what's the difference between my own shell and why ever would I need a different shell? Well, I can show you that on my main shell, I do not have any program that is called hello, but if I try to run nix shell with the hello package in that shell, we see that it successfully runs. And now if I type hello, we get back an hello word, which we didn't get back in my original shell. In fact, nix shell is useful exactly for this reason, allows us to have a shell environment with some packages installed on the fly that we may or may not have on our own. And if you connect the dots with what we saw previously, saying that it's hard to get all the correct dependencies for our Plutus code, if we go into our Plutus apps repository that we installed, we see that we have a file called shell.nix, and in this shell.nix there are some options that are passed automatically when running the nix-shell program. In fact, we saw that running nix-shell alone in any directory in general gives us an error. However, when in the working directory we do have a shell.nix, or if not present, a default.nix file, those are treated as option to pass to the nix-shell program. In fact, running nix-shell in the Plutus app repository, well, will take a while since it is going to fetch each of the dependencies of Plutus. However, once it finishes to get all the dependencies, we see that by only running the nix-shell, we successfully entered a nix-shell environment. And in this particular environment, we do have all the packages needed in order to properly write Plutus code. And I can show you, of course, this. If we open the Plutus Pioneer program repository from a nix-shell environment, well, we no longer get any error since all the dependencies needed are automatically handled by Nix, and in particular by the options that we pass to nix-shell through the shell.nix. Now, since as I mentioned before, Plutus does have a lot of dependencies, building this Nix environment each time may take quite a lot of time, and in order to cache the dependencies that we need in order to open that environment in which we were before, in the Plutus directory that you can find in GitHub as we saw before, if you scroll until the Nix, you'll see how to set up the IOHK binary cache, and you can follow the steps here, and you'll see that once you first run once the process of building the Nix environment, then the result of that build will be cached so that you do not have to spend hours just to enter an environment. You do not need me to read these steps, but this is pretty straightforward, and I have already done these steps. In fact, in the /etc/nix folder, I do have a nix.conf file, and if I ask to see the content of this nix.conf file, we see that these two lines that we can read here are present in my nix.conf file. So as you can see, I do already have the caches for the Plutus Nix environment. Another important way to use the Plutus apps repository that we installed is to, once again, into the Nix shell, is to access the documentation for the Plutus version that we are using. And in order to do so, we just have to run the command build and serve docs in the Plutus app as written here, and this will set up a local HTTP server, and we can of course access it. which will bring us to the documentation for Plutus in general, but in particular, if we want to access the actual documentation for what we'll need while coding, we have to go to the /add doc page, always on our local server, and here we'll find all the documentation for what we may need in order to write our contracts. So with this, we saw all we need in order to have our environment to write Plutus contracts, and we also saw how to access documentation that, as we'll see, will turn very useful. So in the next videos, we'll learn how to use what we see in this page. If you had the occasion to learn something from this video, consider to subscribe to the channel. In any case, let me thank you for your time. Remember to stay decentralized, and I will see you in another video. Bye bye.